Dear friend, let me share with you a story from the timber camps of Oregon. Back when the sawmills ran on steam and sweat, this tale came to me from my grandfather, who worked those very mills in 1883. It's about the power of a good meal, not the fancy kind you'd find in city restaurants, but the kind that fills more than just your belly. You know the type I mean, the meals that remind you of your mother's kitchen, when the world felt safer and kinder. This is about Martha Brennan, a woman who walked into a camp full of hungry men and suspicious hearts. Carrying nothing but a worn carpetbag and scars that told their own stories, what she did there changed everything, not through grand speeches or confrontation, but through the simple revolutionary act of feeding people properly. The noon whistle hadn't finished shrieking when Martha Brennan stepped through the sawmill gates, her bulk blocking the sun for just a moment. Sawdust swirled around her like yellow snow, but unlike the workers who covered their faces with threadbare bandanas, she stood there breathing it all in, as if the air itself held secrets worth knowing. Jimmy Morse saw her first. The boy, 19 if he was lucky, with arms like pine saplings, dropped his lunch tin with a clatter that rang out over the drone of distant saws. Not because of her size, though she was built solid as a chuck wagon. No, it was the burn scar running from her wrist to her elbow, purple-pink against weathered skin, that made him stare. "You lost, ma'am." Wade, the foreman, spat tobacco juice into the sawdust. His right arm hung slightly crooked, an old injury he thought nobody noticed. "This ain't no place for sightseeing." Martha's eyes swept across the lunch scene before her 50 men hunched over their meals like convicts, gnawing on a hardtack that could crack teeth, washing it down with water from a communal barrel that tasted of wood and rust. Nobody talked, nobody laughed. They ate with the grim determination of men fulfilling an unpleasant necessity, looking for Mr. Hollister. Her voice carried the flatness of Ohio farmland, steady as a plow cutting furrow. "Heard you need a cook?" Wade barked a laugh that sounded like a saw hitting a nail. "Hollister don't hire women, so especially not." He stopped himself, but his eyes finished the sentence, taking in her broad shoulders, her thick waist. "Especially not what—" Martha shifted her carpetbag to her other hand. The movement revealed another scar, this one circling her forearm like a bracelet of melted skin. Old Sam, 62 and widowed these 6 years, recognized it right off hot grease. The kind that splattered when you're cooking for a crowd and moving too fast to be careful. "Nothing." Wade pointed toward the office building, a 2-story affair that looked down on the mill yard like a watchtower. "Hollister's up there, but I'm telling you now, save yourself the walk." Martha nodded, but didn't move right away. She watched Jimmy struggle with his hardtack, saw him dunk it in water to soften it enough to chew. The boy's chest rattled when he breathed that telltale wheeze of someone fighting their own lungs. Her fingers tightened on the carpetbag handle. "That your boy?" she asked Sam, who sat alone on an upturned crate. "No, ma'am. Lost my boys to cholera back in '76. Sam didn't look up from his meal, if you could call a heel of stale bread and a strip of jerky a meal. That's Jimmy. Good kid. Sends half his pay home for his sister's medicine." Martha's jaw worked like she was chewing on words, deciding which ones to spit out and which to swallow. Finally, she just said, "Medicine's expensive." "Everything's expensive," Sam replied, "except what they feed us here." The woman studied the scene a moment longer. The men scattered across the yard in small, isolated groups, the silence that hung heavier than the sawdust, the way nobody met anyone else's eyes, like a herd that had forgotten it was a herd. Jimmy had picked up his dropped tin, brushing sawdust off a piece of cornbread that looked hard enough to drive nails. When he glanced up, Martha was looking right at him. Not with pity, he'd have bristled at that. More like she was reading something written on his face, something in a language only she knew. "You got something to say," Jimmy challenged, his youth making him brave. Martha's lips twitched, not quite a smile. "Your mother send you that food," the boy's defiance crumbled. "The cornbread, yeah, once a month, when she can. She put pepper in it, maybe a little molasses." Jimmy's eyes widened. "How'd you, yeah, she does. Says it helps with my chest." Martha nodded slowly, like pieces were falling into place in her mind. She looked around the yard again, and this time the men felt her gaze like heat from a stove. Some turned away. Others, like Wade, stared back with a mixture of suspicion and something else, curiosity. Maybe, or a hunger that had nothing to do with food. "Where'd you get them scars?" Wade asked suddenly, the question jumping out before he could stop it. Martha looked down at her arms as if seeing them for the first time. "Kitchen work," she said simply. 20 years of it. You feed enough people. You collect some marks." "Must have been some kitchen," Sam ventured. "To leave marks like those." For the first time, Martha's face showed something besides that steady calm. Just a flicker, like wind disturbing still water. "8 boys," she said quietly. 3 meals a day, every day, until there weren't 8 anymore. The words hung in the air. Nobody asked what happened to the 8 boys. In 1883, there were too many ways to lose children, and none of them were easy to hear. The whistle blew again. Lunch was over. Men rose slowly, brushing crumbs from canvas pants, preparing to return to the saws and the danger and the endless whine. A blade through wood, but they moved different now, casting glances back at the woman with the scars who stood like she was waiting for something. Martha picked up her carpetbag and headed for Hollister's office. Behind her, Jimmy called out, "He won't hire you?" She paused, turned halfway. "We'll see about that." And then she was climbing the stairs to the office, each step deliberate as a heartbeat, leaving 50 men to wonder what kind of woman walked into a sawmill carrying kitchen scars like medals and spoke of 8 boys in the past tense. Before we continue, please leave a like and subscribe. Let me know which city you're watching from. Now, let's get back to the story. The office door handle was warm brass, slick with oil from too many hands. Martha turned it slow, heard the mechanism click like a rifle being cocked. Ezra Hollister didn't look up from his ledger. His pen scratched across paper numbers in purple ink, columns straight as fence posts. The room smelled of pipe tobacco and something else, sour, like milk left in the sun. "We don't need kitchen help." His voice came from behind a wall of cigarette smoke. "If Wade sent you up here for a laugh, tell him I'm not amused." Martha stepped inside. Floorboards groaned under her weight, not delicate creaks, but solid complaints of old wood taking a load. She set her carpetbag down gentle, the soft thud making Hollister's pen stop mid-stroke. He looked up then, Eyes the color of dirty ice traveled from her face to her shoulders to her waist, lingering at each stop like a timber buyer checking for rot. His mouth pulled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Jesus Christ." He leaned back, chair springs squealing. "You're built like a freight car." Martha's hands stayed folded over her apron. She watched him stand, watched him circle her. His boots clicked on the pine floor. Expensive boots, the kind that never touched actual dirt. A gold watch chain swung from his vest, catching light from the window behind him on the desk. She spotted it, a photograph frame turned face down dust outlining where it used to stand upright. Next to it, 3 unopened telegrams, seals intact, the top one dated 3 months back. "You'd slow my whole kitchen down," Hollister said, completing his circle. "Hell, you'd probably eat half the food yourself." And Martha's eyes tracked from the telegrams to a drawer pulled slightly open. Inside the corner of another photograph, visible a woman's face, young, unsmiling. She shifted her gaze to Hollister's soft middle, the way his vest strained at the buttons. "Your men eatin' well?" she asked. Hollister stopped moving. "They eat enough to work or enough to live." His face darkened like sky before rain. "They ain't complained." Martha looked at the window overlooking the yard. Through the glass, she could see Jimmy bent over, coughing into his fist, Wade favoring his strong arm as he lifted a cant hook. "Men who need work don't complain," she said. "They just die quiet." The words landed between them, heavy as a felled tree. Hollister's hand moved to his watch chain, fingers working the gold links. That's when Martha saw it, his wedding ring, still on his finger, but worn on the right hand now, moved but not removed. Martha's fingers found the cookhouse door latch iron, cold despite the afternoon heat. The door scraped open on hinges that screamed for oil. The smell hit first. Rancid grease, mouse droppings, something dead in the walls. Her boots stuck to the floor with each step, years of spilled lard and ground-in flour making a paste that grabbed at her soles. Flies rose from the sink in a black cloud, their buzzing angry at being disturbed. The Acme stove squatted against the back wall like a dying animal, rust bleeding through its black iron skin. Martha ran her palm along its top. Her hand came away orange-brown. The firebox door hung loose on one hinge. Inside, ash piled thick enough to plant seeds in. 50 tin plates stacked on warped shelves, each one filmed with old grease. Pots with bottoms burned through. A knife so dull it couldn't cut butter, if there'd been butter to cut. She opened the supply closet. 4 sacks of beans, most of them sprouting. A barrel of flour with weevils floating on top like pepper. Lard in a wooden bucket, gone yellow as old teeth. Salt fused into a solid block from moisture. No pepper, no herbs, no onions, no meat. Martha rolled up her sleeves past the burn scars. The pump handle by the sink took both hands to work rust flakes falling like red snow into the basin. Water came brown, then yellow, then almost clear. She filled a pot, set it on the floor. The scrub brush she found had 3 bristles left. She got on her knees anyway. "What in hell's name are you doing?" Wade stood in the doorway, 3 men behind him. The late afternoon sun outlined their shapes, wide shoulders, arms thick from swinging axes. Martha didn't look up from scrubbing, getting ready to cook. In that, one of the younger men laughed, nervous sound, like a crow with something stuck in its throat. "Rats won't even eat in there." Her brush kept moving. Circles, black water turning blacker. "Then I guess you won't either." More men gathered. She felt them more than saw them, shadows crossing the floor, boot shuffles, the sound of breathing. Someone whispered. Someone else answered. The words "crazy" and "woman" drifted through the doorway. Old Sam pushed through the crowd. His knees popped as he lowered himself to the floor beside her. "Give me that brush." Martha looked at him, 62 years old, hands gnarled as tree roots. "This ain't your job. Ain't yours either, according to Hollister." Sam took the brush, started working on a different section of floor. "But I ate slop for 6 years. Man gets tired of slop." The crowd shifted, feet shuffled. Then Jimmy dropped down too, using his sleeve to wipe at the stove. His breath wheezed with the effort, but he kept at it. "Boy's gonna ruin his shirt," Wade said. "Boy's got sense." Sam shot back. "More than some others." Martha stood, knees cracking. She walked to the doorway where Wade blocked the light, close enough to smell the tobacco juice on his breath, the sawdust in his hair. "You stopping me from cooking?" Wade's jaw worked. His good arm twitched. The bad one stayed still. "Hollister said you got one meal, that's all. Then I'd better get to it." She pushed past him, not rough, just steady as a river current. Outside, she bent to examine the ground near the cookhouse. Her fingers found what she was looking for, lamb's quarters growing in the shade, wild onions by the water barrel, even some sage that somebody must have planted years back and forgot about. "What are you doing now?" Wade asked. Martha pulled up a handful of the lamb's quarters, making something from nothing. You'd recognize it if you ever went hungry. Jimmy appeared at her elbow, glancing around like he was about to commit a crime. His hand darted into his pocket, came out with a small cloth bundle. "Here." She opened it. Dried red peppers, the kind that grew in kitchen gardens back east. The smell sharp enough to clear your head. "Ma sent them," Jimmy whispered. "Said they help with breathing, but I reckon food needs them more than my chest does." Martha's fingers closed around the peppers. "Your ma raised you right. She did what she could." Jimmy's Adam's apple bobbed. "After Pa died in the war, wasn't much to raise us with." The sun dropped lower. Shift-end whistle would blow soon. Martha walked back into the cookhouse cleaner now, though still a long way from clean. She lit the stove, coaxing flame from damp wood, started beans, soaking in the biggest pot she could find, cut lard into chunks with the dull knife, using more force than skill. Men kept watching from the doorway. She felt their eyes as she measured flour, as she pumped more water, as she sorted through the weevily grain for what was still good. Her movement stayed steady, no hurry, no show, just work. The whistle shrieked, "Shift over." Martha stood in the cookhouse door as 50 men gathered in the yard. Flour dusted her arms up to the elbows. Smoke from the stove made a halo behind her head. The burn scars caught the dying light, purple and pink and silver all at once. "Kitchen's open tomorrow morning," she said. Her voice carried over the crowd without rising. 5 o'clock. "Them that wants to eat can eat." Wade stepped forward. "And them that don't." Martha's eyes found his steady as her hands, steady as her voice. "Them that thinks my size is a problem shouldn't taste my food. Simple as that." She turned to go back inside, then stopped. Looked back over her shoulder at the crowd of men, tired men, hungry men, men who'd been eating hardtack and jerky so long they'd forgotten food could be something else. "One more thing," she said. "I cook for people who know the difference between fuel and food. You figure out which one you've been eating, then you decide if you want to keep eating it." She went inside. The door closed with a sound like a period at the end of a sentence. Through the window, she saw Hollister standing on his office balcony, watching. His hand gripped the railing hard enough to whiten his knuckles. In the yard below, Wade picked up a piece of hardtack from someone's dropped lunch. He tried to break it in half. The bread wouldn't snap. It bent like leather. 4 in the morning came black as the inside of a coal bin. Martha's match scraped against the stove's iron belly once, twice. Before catching, the sulfur smell bit at her nose. She fed kindling to the flame, watching it catch on the pitch-sticky pine, orange tongues licking at splits in the wood. The beans had soaked all night in water she'd changed 3 times. Now they sat heavy in her palm, skins tight, ready to give up their hardness. She poured them into the big pot, the only one without holes, and set it on the stove's hottest spot. The iron ticked as it heated, expanding joint by joint. Outside, the bunkhouse sat dark against darker trees. 50 men sleeping in there, breathing sawdust and sweat in each other's dreams. She knew that sleep, the kind that came from bone-tired work, that pressed you down into thin mattresses like a weight on your chest. Martha hummed, not loud, just enough to keep her company, an old song from Ohio, something about rivers and long roads home. Her knife found rhythm with the tune as she chopped the wild onions. The blade barely cut, so she had to rock it, lean her weight into it. The onion smell rose sharp, made her eyes water. Good. Tears for onions made sense. Other kinds didn't help nothing. She dropped the onions into the pot. Then the lamb's quarters, wilted from yesterday's picking but still green enough. The sage she rubbed between her palms first, releasing oils that smelled like her grandmother's Sunday kitchen. Jimmy's peppers, she used careful 3 pods, no more. Enough to wake the mouth, not enough to burn. The lard went in last, a yellow chunk that hissed when it hit the hot liquid. She stirred with a wooden spoon so old the handle had grooves worn where fingers gripped it year after year. Someone else's fingers. Someone who'd cooked here before giving up on these men and their stubborn hunger. Steam rose from the pot, first thin, barely visible, then thicker, carrying smell with it, the beans breaking down, releasing their earth-deep flavor, the onions going sweet, the sage threading through it all like smoke through trees. 5 o'clock, still dark, but the darkness had texture, now purple at the edges. Stars fading like promises you couldn't quite remember making. Martha added salt, tasted, added more. Her stomach growled. When did she last eat? Yesterday day. Before. Didn't matter. This wasn't about her hunger. The bunkhouse door creaked open. A figure stumbled out, one of the young ones, heading for the privy. He stopped mid-stride, his head turned toward the cookhouse. Even in the dark, Martha could see his nostrils flare, chest expand as he pulled in air. He stood there, pants half-buttoned, breathing deep, then shook his head hard, like a dog shaking off water, and continued to the privy, but slower now, looking back twice. More movement in the bunkhouse. A window pushed open, then another, men trying to get air that didn't smell like food, but the smell had already gotten inside, was settling into wool blankets and canvas pants, and the spaces between dreams and waking. Martha kept stirring. The mixture thickened, beans breaking apart, making their own gravy. She pulled the pot to a cooler spot on the stove, let it bubble slow, found a second pot, started cornbread. The flour still had weevils, but she picked them out, patient as a crow sorting seeds, added the last of Jimmy's peppers, crushed fine, a spoonful of lard, water, until it felt right under her hands. God damn it! And Wade stood in the doorway, suspenders hanging loose, undershirt stained yellow under the arms, his hair stuck up in gray tufts like he'd been tossing all night. "You're disturbing the men," he said. Martha shaped cornbread into rounds, placed them on the one good baking sheet. Cooking disturbs them. The smell. Wade stopped, swallowed. His Adam's apple moved like something trapped under skin. "It's too early for kitchen noise." She slid the cornbread into the oven. The door squealed on its hinge. Same time the last cook started, and the one before that. They didn't cook like. Wade's good hand gestured at the pot, at the steam, at something he couldn't name. They didn't make it smell. Martha turned to face him full on. In the lamplight, his face looked hollow, cheeks sucked in like he was permanently holding his breath. "When's the last time you ate something that smelled good enough to wake you up?" Wade's mouth opened, closed. His bad arm twitched, the way it did when he forgot to keep it still. Behind him, more men gathered in the dooryard, not approaching, just standing in the gray dawn, facing the cookhouse like plants facing sun, some still in their union suits, some holding empty lunch tins from yesterday, forgotten in their hands. The cornbread smell joined the beans, sweet corn and pepper, crisp edges browning. One man Martha couldn't see who made a sound in his throat. Might have been a word, might have been just need. "Get back to the bunkhouse," Wade barked. His voice cracked on the last word. "Breakfast ain't for 2 hours." Nobody moved. I said, "We heard you." Old Sam pushed through the crowd, fully dressed, suspenders neat, boots laced. "We also hear our stomachs. Man reaches an age. He stops ignoring what his body tells him." Wade's face went red as the peppers in Martha's pot. "You work for me." "Sam?" "I work for Hollister, same as you." Sam's eyes stayed steady on Wade's face. "And right now, I'm wondering if Hollister knows his foreman's been buying the cheapest slop to feed his workers, pocketing the difference." The silence that followed had weight. Even the steam seemed to pause, hanging in the air like a held breath. Wade's good hand clenched into a fist. "You don't know nothing about the food budget being 3 times what we actually see." Sam pulled a small notebook from his pocket. "I know numbers." "Wade?" "Been keeping track." Martha stirred the beans, the wooden spoon scraping steady against iron. Let the men sort their business. She had cooking to do. More light now, pink bleeding across the eastern mountains. The sawmill stood ready for the day, saws gleaming with oil, logs stacked like offerings. But the men stayed clustered around the cookhouse, drawn by something older than wages. Hollister appeared on his office balcony, even from across the yard. Martha could see his knuckles white as he gripped the railing. His mouth moved, saying something to himself or to the morning air. Jimmy pushed to the front of the crowd. The boy's chest rattled with each breath, but his eyes stayed fixed on the cookhouse door. "Miss Martha." She looked up from the stove. "That food?" He swallowed. "Tried again. It smells like something I remember but can't name. Memory lives in the nose more than the brain," Martha said. She pulled the cornbread from the oven, golden brown, edges crisp, steam rising like prayers. "Your mama probably cooked with pepper for your breathing." "Body remembers what helped it, even when the mind forgets." Jimmy's eyes went wet. He turned away quick, but not quick enough. "Shift starts in 1 hour," Wade announced, voice forced steady. "Any man late to his station gets docked." The men didn't disperse. They spread out, some sitting on stumps, some leaning against the bunkhouse wall, but all staying within the smell range of the cookhouse, waiting. Martha wiped her hands on her apron, looked at the pot of beans, thick and rich now, enough for 50 hungry men, looked at the cornbread cooling on the counter, looked at the crowd of men pretending not to watch her every move. Then she looked up at Hollister, still on his balcony. Their eyes met across the distance. His face changed. Something flickered there, gone before she could read it. He turned and went inside. But not before she saw him pressing his palm flat against his stomach, the way a man did when hunger had gone past wanting and turned into pain. The dinner triangle rang out across the yard noon, though the sun said different, hanging lower than it should this late in the year. Men straightened from their workstations, backs popping like green wood in fire. Sawdust fell from their shoulders, their hair, the creases in their clothes where it collected like snow in valley folds. Sam set down his cant hook. His hands, swollen at the joints, took their time letting go. 6 years of this, 6 years of noon triangles and hardtack and the slow fade of remembering what real food tasted like. He reached for his lunch tin, then stopped. The cookhouse door stood open. Martha hadn't called out, hadn't rung any special bell. She just stood there, wiping her hands on her apron, watching. Wade had already taken his position by the water barrel, piece of hardtack in one hand, his everyday show of making do. "Don't nobody got to eat nothing they don't want to," he announced to the air. His good arm had gestured at the cookhouse. "Regular rations are right here, same as always." Sam looked at the hardtack in his own tin, yesterday's piece, saved because you could save hardtack forever, and it never got worse than it already was. He tried to remember the last time he'd been hungry, not just empty, but hungry for something specific. The feeling had died somewhere around the second year of widowhood, when cooking for one seemed pointless and eating became just another chore. His knees protested as he stood, bone ground against bone, cartilage worn thin from decades of bending, lifting, hauling. His first step toward the cookhouse made Wade's head snap up. "Sam!" The old man stopped but didn't turn. "What? You know what Hollister said? One meal. She fails. She goes, then I guess I'll know in one meal." Sam started walking again, each step deliberate, boot falls heavy on the pack of dirt. Behind him, silence spread through the yard like spilled oil. 50 men watching. The saws had stopped lunch break, but the steam engine still hissed and clicked, cooling metal contracting in the mountain air. The cookhouse threshold was worn smooth, dipped in the middle from years of boots passing over. Sam's shadow fell across it. Then his body followed. Inside, the air hung thick with moisture and smell. Beans and pork fat and something else. Something that made his mouth fill with spit before his brain could name it. Martha stood behind the serving table, 3 big pots lined up, steam rising, bowls stacked beside them, the good ones, not the tin plates, actual ceramic bowls, chipped and mismatched but clean. "Sit," she said. Sam sat. The bench groaned under him. He watched her ladle beans into a bowl, the liquid thick and brown, chunks of onion floating like pale islands. She added cornbread, still warm, the edges crumbling where she broke it. The bowl landed in front of him. Weight to it, heft. The spoon she handed him was silver plate, tarnished but solid. He dipped the spoon, brought it up. Steam rose, carrying smell direct to his brain, bypassing thought and hitting memory. His hand shook. When had that started? The tremor made ripples in the liquid. The first taste, salt first, then heat from the peppers, not enough to burn, but enough to wake every sleep-dulled nerve in his mouth. The beans had given up their hardness, gone creamy, making their own gravy thick with starch and fat. An onion piece burst between his teeth, sweetness flooding. The sage came last, earthy and deep, like October ground after rain. Sam's eyes closed without him meaning to. His throat made a sound, not word, not sob, just sound. His mouth knew this, not this exact taste, but this feeling. This was food that meant something. Food that said someone gave a damn whether you lived or died. The second spoonful went down easier. The third, fourth, fifth, he wasn't counting anymore. The cornbread crumbled into the beans, soaking up liquid, making each bite different from the last. The pepper heat built slow, warming his chest from inside. Jesus Christ, Sam! He opened his eyes. Jimmy stood in the doorway, eyes wide, watching him eat like he was watching something obscene or holy. "What?" Sam's voice came out rough. Jimmy swallowed. "Your face. You look like a man eating." Sam took another spoonful. "Been a while since I did that." Jimmy stepped inside, then another step. His chest wheezed with each breath, that wet rattle that never quite went away. Martha already had a bowl ready. She didn't speak, just set it on the table, slid it toward the boy. Jimmy sat, picked up the spoon. His first taste made him cough, the peppers hitting his congested lungs. But the second bite went down smooth, and the third, and then he was eating steady as Sam, their spoons clicking against ceramic in off-rhythm percussion. Well, shit! 3 more men in the doorway. The Tucker brothers and their cousin from Tennessee, the one with the burned face from a steam explosion 2 winters back. They stood there, lunch tins in their hands, looking between the door and Wade, who still stood by the water barrel, his hardtack going soft in his sweating palm. "There's room," Martha said, not inviting, just stating fact. The Tucker brothers moved first, twins who did everything in tandem. Their cousin followed, his scarred cheek twitching nerve damage, not emotion. 3 more bowls, 3 more men sitting, 3 more faces changing as the first bite hit. Wade shouted something from outside. The words didn't matter. Men were moving now, drawn by the sound coming from inside the cookhouse, not conversation, but the sounds of eating, real eating, spoons on bowls, satisfied grunts. Someone sighing deep as their belly finally got what it had been asking for. "Don't mean nothing," Wade called out. "Tomorrow she'll be gone and you'll be back to regular rations." But his voice had gone thin, stretched. And when Martha looked through the window, she saw him standing alone by the water barrel, hardtack forgotten in his hand, watching his crew disappear one by one into the cookhouse. 10 men, 15, 20. Martha ladled steady. No hurry, no worry about running out. The pot seemed bottomless, though it couldn't be. Steam rose from each bowl like incense, like offering. Men ate without talking, but the silence had changed not the dead quiet of exhaustion, but something alive, present. "Move over. Sam!" The old man scooted down the bench, making room for another body, then another. Men pressed close, shoulders touching, sharing heat and smell and the strange intimacy of eating good food together. Someone burped. Someone else laughed short bark of surprise at the sound. 30 men inside now, more crowding the doorway. Martha's ladle scraped the pot bottom. She tilted it, gathering the last of the beans. 5 more bowls, maybe 6. The cornbread was already gone. But she kept serving, face neutral as always, like she was dealing cards in a game where she had no stake. Through the window, up in his office, Hollister's shadow moved behind the glass, watching. His hand pressed against the window, fingers spread like he was trying to touch something he couldn't reach. "Miss Martha?" Jimmy's voice, quiet beside her. "You got enough?" She looked at the boy, 19 years old, chest bad since birth, probably wouldn't see 30 if the consumption had its way. His bowl sat empty, scraped clean. Around him, 40 men, all looking the same empty bowls, eyes on her, waiting. "Got enough for them that's hungry," she said. "We're all hungry," someone said from the back. "Been hungry so long we forgot what full felt like." Martha wiped her hands on her apron, looked at the nearly empty pot, looked at the men still outside, Wade among them, pride and hunger fighting it out on their faces. That's when she saw it, Hollister coming down the office stairs, not looking at the cookhouse, walking toward the supply shed where the food stores were kept, where Wade's cheap hardtack and salt pork lived beside the locked cabinet of better goods, the ones Wade claimed didn't exist. He had a crowbar in his hand. The crowbar hit the supply shed lock with a sound like a bell cracking. Once, twice. The metal bent, held, then snapped. Hollister's breath came out in clouds. Afternoon had gone cold while nobody was watching. Inside the shed, burlap sacks stood in neat rows. He grabbed one, ripped it open. White flour poured out, fine as December snow, not a weevil in sight. Another sack salt pork wrapped in clean cloth. Another coffee beans that released their oil-dark smell when his fingers crushed them. Wade appeared in the doorway, his face the color of old paper. "Mr. Hollister, I can explain." "Shut up." Hollister hefted a crate marked Eagle brand onto his shoulder. Condensed milk, 12 cans. "Just shut up." He carried the crate to the cookhouse, boot falls heavy enough to make the chickens scatter, when had there been chickens? Someone must have brought them, but he hadn't noticed until now. Their rust-colored bodies pecking at bugs in the dirt. Martha stood at the stove, scraping the last beans from the pot. She didn't look up when his shadow filled the doorway, didn't flinch when the crate hit the floor hard enough to rattle the bowls. "There's more," he said. His voice came out strange, like it belonged to someone else. "Good supplies. Wade's been—" He stopped, swallowed, started different. "Use what you need." She wiped her hands on her apron, slow and deliberate, looked at the cans of milk, then at him. Her face showed nothing, not surprise, not satisfaction, not anything he could read. "Supper's at 6, she said. That was all. She turned back to the stove, started cleaning the pot with steady, circular motions. Hollister stood there, waiting for something more. Thanks, maybe, or accusation about not checking the supplies sooner. Something. The pot rang as she scrubbed. The sound followed him out. 5 o'clock came gray and tired. Men dragged back from the saws, shoulders bent, sawdust in every crease and fold. But instead of heading straight to bunks, they gathered in the yard. Someone had pulled benches from somewhere, arranged them in a loose circle. Old Sam sat whittling, making curls of pine that fell between his boots. The cookhouse door opened. Smell rolled out onions frying in actual butter, potatoes that must have come from the locked stores, and meat, real meat crackling in iron skillets. Jesus wept, someone whispered. Wade stood apart, his back against the tool shed. His lunch tin dangled from his good hand, forgotten. His eyes tracked between the men in Hollister's office, calculating something. "Come on, Wade." Sam didn't look up from his whittling. "Nobody's keeping score anymore." Wade's jaw worked like he was chewing words. His bad arm twitched, the way it did when he was thinking hard. Then he let the tin drop. It hit the dirt with a hollow sound. He walked to the cookhouse, taking his hat off as he crossed the threshold. Inside it, Martha had pushed 3 tables together, making one long surface. Mismatched plates lined it, some ceramic, some tin, 2 actual china pieces someone had found. Forks and knives appeared from pockets, from bunks, from wherever men had been hoarding them. The Tucker brothers carried in their own bench, set it alongside. Their burned cousin brought a tablecloth red checkered, folded so many times the creases had gone white. "Was my mother's," he said to nobody in particular. "Been carrying it 6 years. Martha set down a platter. Pork chops thick as dictionary pages, edges charred black, fat still sizzling, potatoes cut into rounds, fried in the pork grease until their edges went crispy. The onions had caramelized down to jam-dark sweetness. Nobody moved. 50 men staring at food like they'd forgotten what to do with it. "It's gonna get cold," Martha said. Sam reached first. His hand shook as he speared a chop with his fork. The meat released juice when he cut it, pink running into the potatoes. He took a bite, closed his eyes, chewed slow like he was memorizing the texture. Then everyone moved at once, hands reaching, plates filling, the sounds of knife on plate and teeth on meat. Someone laughed short. Surprise sound. Someone else joined in, not at anything funny, just at the strangeness of sitting together, eating together, being something other than separate men doing separate time. "My wife," Sam said suddenly. Everyone stopped. He never talked about his wife. She used to fry potatoes like this, said the secret was not moving them around too much, let them sit and think about becoming food. The Tucker brothers exchanged glances. The younger one cleared his throat. "Our ma collected bacon grease in a coffee can, used it for everything, said butter was for rich folks, but bacon grease was for flavor." Stories crept out sideways, careful as deer approaching water. This one's father who built a smokehouse. That one's grandmother who could make bread from anything acorns, cattail roots, even grass seed, during the bad years. Jimmy talked about his mother's garden, how she grew peppers that could burn your tongue or cure your lungs depending on how you used them. His chest seemed clearer as he talked, words coming easier. Wade set down his fork. Everyone tensed. "My arm," he said. His good hand touched his bad elbow. Wasn't the saw, was a cook stove. Wife was pregnant, needed help lifting a pot. I grabbed it wrong. Whole thing tipped. Oil everywhere. Arm never worked right after. He picked up his fork again. She blamed herself. That's why she left. Not because of the arm. Because she couldn't stop apologizing for it. The confession hung there. Nobody knew what to do with it. Martha passed him the platter. Meat's getting cold. He took another chop. The moment passed, but something had shifted. The air in the cookhouse felt different, thicker, warmer. Like all their breathing had changed the chemistry of it. Someone pulled out a harmonica. Not a good 110 in wood. Probably ordered from a catalog. The first notes came out reedy and sharp, but by the third measure, he'd found Red River Valley. A few men hummed along, not quite singing. Through the window, twilight turned the mountains purple-black. The sawmill stood silent, waiting for tomorrow's shift. Up in his office, a lamp flickered on. Hollister's shadow moved across the window. He had something in his hands. Papers, maybe, or that photograph from his desk drawer. "He's got hardtack up there," Jimmy said, following Martha's gaze. "Saw him buying it from Wade's personal stash this morning. Man makes his choices." Martha started collecting plates, stacking them careful so the china wouldn't chip. "Can't make them for him." "Could invite him down," Sam suggested. "Could." Martha carried plates to the wash basin. But a man's got to be hungry enough to ask. Stomach hunger's one thing, other kinds harder to admit to. The harmonica player switched to something slower, sadder. A waltz, maybe, or a hymn with the God taken out. Men lingered at the table, nobody eager to return to bunks, to the solitary dark that waited there. "We're behind on tomorrow's quota," Wade said eventually. "Hollister's going to expect, 'We'll make it.'" One of the Tucker brothers stretched, joints popping. "Feel like I could cut timber all night after that meal." Others nodded. The exhaustion that usually followed eating had been replaced by something else. Energy, maybe. Or just the absence of the constant, grinding emptiness they'd grown used to. Martha wiped her hands, watching them plan tomorrow's work. They divided tasks different now, accounting for Wade's bad arm without making a show of it, giving Jimmy the lighter loads without calling him weak. Like a crew, instead of 50 separate men serving time. Outside, something scraped against wood. They all turned toward the sound. Hollister stood at the cookhouse door, not in the doorway, just beside it, one hand on the frame. His collar was loose, vest unbuttoned. In his other hand, a tin plate. Empty. "Smelled the pork," he said. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Martha dried her hands on her apron with the same steady motion she always used. She looked at him, really looked, the way she'd looked at Jimmy that first day, reading something written in the lines around his eyes, the set of his shoulders. "Got one chop left," she said. "Gone cold, though. Cold's fine." His voice cracked on the second word. She picked up the last plate, one of the china ones, a blue willow pattern with only one small chip on the rim, set the cold pork on it, added the last of the potatoes, the last of the onions, handed it to him. He took it, looked at the meat like he'd never seen pork before, or maybe like he was seeing it for the first time in years. "There's room at the table," Sam said. Hollister's fingers tightened on the plate until his knuckles went white. The sound came first. Wet crack like green wood splitting wrong. Then Jimmy's voice, not quite a scream, more like air pushed out too fast from lungs that already struggled. Martha's knife stopped mid-chop. Carrot rounds scattered across the cutting board. Through the window, she saw men running toward the log deck, their bodies dark against the morning fog. She moved without thinking. Her hands grabbed clean rags from the shelf, the bottle of grain alcohol she used for cleaning. Her body knew this rhythm, the preparation for blood, for damage, for what came after accidents. The fog parted as she pushed through. Men stood in a circle, their faces turned down toward something she couldn't see yet. Then Sam stepped aside, and there was Jimmy on the cow's ground, his right leg bent at an angle that didn't match how legs should bend. Not broken through, she'd seen enough real breaks to know, but wrong enough that his face had gone the color of wood ash. "Log rolled," Wade said, his voice tight. "Caught him at the knee when he tried to jump clear." The boy's chest rattled with each breath, worse than usual. Pain did, that made everything harder. His hands clutched at the dirt, fingers digging grooves like he was trying to hold on to the earth itself. Martha knelt. Her hands moved over his leg, feeling through the canvas pants, swelling already, hot to touch. But the bone held steady under her fingers. Bad sprain. Maybe torn muscles. Nothing that wouldn't heal with time. "Need to get him inside," she said. 4 men stepped forward at once. They lifted Jimmy gentle as they'd lift a child, though he was near grown. His head lolled back, and Martha saw it then, the particular shade of yellow in his hair, the way his jaw clenched against pain, like another boy, 13 years back, who'd held his jaw the same way while fever ate him from inside out. The bunkhouse smelled of sawdust and sweat and unwashed men. They laid Jimmy on his bunk-thin mattress on rope springs, one wool blanket that had seen better decades. His breathing came shallow, quick, like a bird's. Martha's hands moved steady, tore strips from her own petticoat. The cloth was cleaner than anything in the bunkhouse. Wrapped his knee tight, but not too tight. The swelling would come worse before it got better. "Need my big pot," she told Sam, "and a chicken from the yard. Them's Hollister's chickens." "Then Hollister can come stop me himself." Sam went. Others followed. Through the window, Martha watched them chase chickens around the yard. Grown men stumbling and cursing and finally catching a fat Rhode Island red that squawked like Judgment Day. She wrung its neck quick. One sharp motion, plucked it with the efficiency of someone who'd done this 10,000 times. Into the pot with water, onions, the last of her sage, set it on the stove to simmer. Jimmy moaned. His eyes opened, focused on nothing. "Ma." Martha's hand stopped stirring. She made herself continue. Round and round, the spoon's scraping iron. "Just rest," she said. "Ma, my chest hurts." She added salt to the pot, pepper, a handful of wild garlic from her morning gathering. The steam rose, and with it the smell of healing, or at least the attempt at it. Chicken soup couldn't cure everything. She'd learned that the hard way, feeding broth to a boy whose fever wouldn't break, whose breathing got shallower each day until Martha Sam stood in the doorway. Behind him, more men. The Tucker brothers held their hats. Wade had his good arm around the burned cousin's shoulders. "Boy asked for his ma," Sam said quiet. "She's 200 miles east. Can't get word to her for days." Martha ladled broth into a bowl, tested the temperature against her wrist. "Then we do what we can with what we have." She sat on the edge of Jimmy's bunk. The rope springs creaked. His eyes tracked to her face, pupils wide from pain or shock or both. "Need you to drink," she said. He turned his head away. "Can't." "Can." She slipped her arm under his shoulders, lifted him gentle. The spoon found his lips, small sips. The first spoonful dribbled down his chin. The second he swallowed. By the third, His hand came up to steady hers, though his fingers shook. Taste like. He stopped, swallowed again, like something I remember. Martha kept feeding him, spoon to lips. Wait, swallow, repeat. The men watched from the doorway, silent. Someone had brought a lantern, though it was still daylight. The flame made shadows dance on the walls. "My boy." "Oh," she said. Didn't mean to. The words just came. 13 years old, same color hair as you. Jimmy's eyes found hers. Fever took him. 3 days. I fed him broth like this, every hour. Stayed awake, counting his breaths. Making sure the next one came. Her hand stayed steady, spooning soup. Third night, he asked for his daddy. Daddy'd been dead 2 years already. But he asked anyway. The room had gone still. Even the lantern flame stopped flickering. I told him Daddy was coming. Soon. Just rest until Daddy comes. She wiped Jimmy's chin with the clean cloth. He smiled, first time in 3 days. Then he stopped breathing, real peaceful, like he was just waiting for permission. Jimmy's hand gripped hers. "I ain't dying." "No," Martha agreed. "You ain't. Your knee's busted up, but you'll heal. Seen worse on boys younger than you. But you reminded me, is all, the way you hold your face when you're hurting." Outside, boot falls on the porch, slow, heavy. Hollister's shadow fell across the doorway. He didn't come in, just stood there, watching. His hands had hung at his sides, empty. "Mr. Hollister," Wade started. "Heard there was an accident." His voice sounded wrong, like he'd been running. "The boy, knees torn up," Martha said without looking at him. "Needs rest. Proper food. Time." "How much time?" Now she did look right at him, the way she'd looked that first day. "Much as it takes." His jaw worked. She could see him calculating days of work lost, quotas unmet, contracts at risk. His fingers tapped against his leg, counting costs. "He have people?" he asked finally. "Mother, sister with consumption. They'll need—" He stopped, started different. "His pay continues. Full pay." Wade made a sound. "Sir, policy says—" "Policy says whatever I say it says." Hollister's voice went hard. "Full pay until he's back on his feet?" He turned to leave, then stopped, looked back at Martha feeding Jimmy soup, at the men gathered close like family around a sickbed. His face did something complicated, a muscle jumping in his cheek, his mouth pulling down at one corner. "My boy would have been 24 now," he said to nobody in particular. "If he'd lived past 3. The word just hung there. Then he was gone. Boot falls fading across the yard. Martha kept spooning soup. Jimmy kept swallowing. The men stood witness, silent, understanding something had shifted, but not sure what. Through the window, she could see Hollister walking toward his office. But he stopped halfway, stood in the middle of the yard, head tilted back, looking at sky or nothing, or maybe something only he could see. His shoulders shook once, twice. Then he noticed her watching and straightened, walked the rest of the way to his office with his back rigid as fresh-cut pine. But she'd seen, they'd all seen. The owner of Hollister's sawmill, the man who'd built his fortune on keeping distance between himself and the men who bled for his profits, had just cracked open, and through that crack, something human was leaking out. Dawn came cold enough to show breath. Hollister stood at his office window, watching his own reflection fade as light bled across the mountains. 3 days since Jimmy's accident, 3 days of watching men move different, checking on the boy, bringing Martha supplies from their own packages, working harder than they'd worked in years. His stomach cramped, not pain exactly, more like something hollow folding in on itself. He pressed his palm against it, through his vest. The telegram on his desk, another one. Arrived yesterday, sat unopened. His daughter's handwriting on the outside, fourth one in 4 months. Down in the yard, smoke already rose from the cookhouse chimney. Martha would be there, starting the day's bread. He'd watched her routine these 3 days. 4 in the morning, every morning. Fire first, then water, then the steady rhythm of kneading that he could almost hear from his window. His feet moved before his brain decided, down the stairs, across the yard. Fog thick enough to hide him from the bunkhouse windows. His breath clouded white, mixed with the whiter smoke from the chimney. The cookhouse door stood slightly open. Yellow lamplight leaked out. He pushed it wider. The hinges needed oil. They announced him with a squeal that made Martha look up from her work. Flour dusted her arms to the elbows. She had 3 loaves already shaped, waiting to rise. A 4th she worked under her palms, pushing and folding, the dough resisting, then yielding, then resisting again. "Coffee's hot," she said, like he came here every morning, like this was normal. The pot sat on the back of the stove, real coffee from the good supplies he'd unlocked. The smell hit him deep, below thought. He found a cup, poured it full. His hand shook. Coffee slopped over the rim, burned his fingers. He didn't let go. "Sit," Martha said. He sat. The bench felt cold through his wool trousers. He watched her work the dough, her movement sure and economical, no wasted motion. The burn scars on her arms caught the lamplight, purple and silver and pink. She shaped the last loaf, set it with the others, covered them all with a clean cloth. Then she turned to the stove, bacon already in the pan, edges starting to curl, eggs beside it in a bowl. She cracked 6 one-handed, shells breaking clean. "How's the boy?" he asked. His voice came out rough. "Healing. Knees still swole up, but the color's better. He kept down solid food yesterday." She scrambled the eggs with a fork, then poured them into another pan with butter, real butter that foamed and browned at the edges. The smell made his stomach clench again. When had he last eaten actual breakfast? Not coffee and stale bread standing at his desk, but sitting down breakfast. Martha slid a plate in front of him. Bacon crisp but not burned. Eggs fluffy, still wet in the middle. Toast from yesterday's bread, soaked in bacon grease. He picked up the fork, set it down, picked it up again. "It's food, not a contract," Martha said. "Just eat it." The first bite of egg salt and butter and something else. Some herb she'd added. His mouth flooded with spit. He swallowed, took another bite. The bacon shattered between his teeth, released salt and smoke and fat, the toast soft in the middle, crisp at the edges. His throat closed. Not from the food, from something else. Something that had been closed so long he'd forgotten it could open. "My wife," the words came out without planning. "She cooked like this." "Before?" Martha poured herself coffee, sat across from him, didn't prompt, didn't push, just sat. "I started staying late at the mill. There was always something, a contract, a problem with the saws, a disagreement with the men." He ate another bite of eggs. They'd gone cold but still tasted better than anything he'd eaten in years. Came home after she'd already eaten, after she'd given up to waiting. The bacon grease had congealed on the plate. He dragged the last piece of toast through it. "One night I came home and she'd made pot roast, my mother's recipe. Had it warming on the stove, but I'd already eaten. Hardtack and jerky at my desk. Told her I wasn't hungry." His hand holding the fork had gone white at the knuckles. "She looked at me like I'd slapped her." Martha sipped her coffee. Steam rose between them. She left the next month. Said she couldn't watch me starve myself in a house full of food. He set down the fork. "That was 5 years ago." "The telegram's on your desk," Martha said, not a question. "My daughter Lives in Sacramento now. Keeps writing. I don't open them. Why? He looked at her, this woman with burned scars and steady hands and no judgment in her face. What would I say? Sorry I chose lumber over lunch. Sorry I forgot food was more than fuel. Could start with hello. The simplicity of it hit him sideways. He laughed short, sharp sound like bark being stripped. Hello, after 5 years of nothing. Hello. After 5 years is better than silence after 6. She stood, started cleaning up. Efficient movements, no wasted effort. He watched her hands, scarred, strong, sure of their purpose. Your boy, he said. You said fever took him. Her hands stopped for just a moment, then continued washing. 13 years back, last thing I cooked for him was beef broth. Spent 3 days making it perfect. Right temperature, right salt. Stayed up all night spooning it into him. She dried the pan, hung it on its hook. He died anyway. But you kept cooking. What else was there? Stop cooking, stop living. My hands knew the work, even when my heart didn't care about it. She pulled the cloth off the rising bread. The loaves had doubled, ready for the oven. She slid them in, one by one. The smell of yeast and flour filled the room. I didn't cook for 3 years after my wife left, Hollister said. Lived on whatever required no thought. Hardtack, jerky, sometimes nothing. That's not living. That's just not dying. He stood. His legs felt strange, like they'd forgotten how to hold him. The men, they're different now. Since you came. They're fed. Makes a difference. It's more than that. He moved to the window, looked out at the fog-shrouded yard. They talk to each other. They help each other. Wade hasn't yelled at anyone in 2 days. Hard to yell with your mouth full. Another laugh escaped him. When had he last laughed real laughter? Not the bitter kind, I want. He stopped. Started again. Would you stay permanent? The men need to know they matter. Food's just the way of showing it. He turned from the window. She stood by the stove, lamplight catching the silver in her dark hair, solid, real, present in a way he'd forgotten people could be. I don't know how to do this, he said. Do what? Be? He gestured at the cookhouse, the yard, the bunkhouse where men still slept. Part of this, not above it, in it. Martha pulled the bread from the oven, golden brown, crackling as it cooled. The smell filled every corner of the room, escaped through the door to wake the world. You start by showing up, she said, every day. You sit, you eat, you listen. Maybe talk when you got something to say. Maybe don't when you don't. That's simple. Simple ain't easy, but yeah, that's simple. He picked up his empty plate, carried it to the wash basin. She looked surprised, first time he'd seen that expression on her face. I can wash my own dish, he said. I see that. He washed it, dried it, set it with the others. Such a small thing. But his hands shook doing it. Through the window, men started emerging from the bunkhouse. Sam first, then the Tucker brothers. They moved toward the cookhouse, drawn by bread smell and routine and something else, community, maybe, or just the promise of starting the day together instead of alone. They're coming, Martha said. I should go. Should you? He looked at the door, at the men approaching, at the bench where he'd just eaten breakfast like a normal person at a normal table. Hollister, Sam called through the door. Jimmy's asking for you. Hollister's hand froze on the door handle. For me? Says he wants to thank you. For the wages? Through the window, he could see into the bunkhouse. Jimmy propped up on pillows someone had found somewhere. The boy's face turned toward the cookhouse, waiting. Hollister looked at Martha. I don't know what to say to him. Try hello, she said. See where it goes from there. He opened the door. The men stood back, making space, not the fearful space of before, but something else. Room for him to choose his direction. The bread smell followed him out, warm and alive and impossible to ignore. Sam fell into step beside him. Boys, he's been practicing what to say all night. Means something to him. You coming? They walked toward the bunkhouse together, Hollister's expensive boots and Sam's worn ones keeping the same pace. Behind them, Martha began slicing bread. The knife moved through the crust with sounds like small promises breaking open. But through the bunkhouse window, Hollister could see something that made him stop. Jimmy wasn't alone. Beside his bed sat a young woman, maybe 17, same yellow hair, same sharp chin, his sister, the one with consumption, the one he sent half his wages to. She was crying. October came with frost on the pumpkin leaves. Martha stood in her garden, her own garden now. Behind the cabin, Hollister had the men build in August. Not big, but solid. Pine logs chinked tight. A real glass window facing east. A door that closed proper. She pulled the last carrots, soil falling from their orange flesh. Her knees pressed into cold earth through her skirt. Behind her, boots crunched on frozen grass. Them's good carrots. Jimmy stood without his crutch now, weight even on both legs, only a slight favor to the right when tired. Ma says carrots like that mean the cook's got love in her hands. Martha brushed dirt from a particularly large one. Your ma knows gardens. She's coming Sunday for the feast. He shifted, boot scraping gravel. Wants to meet you proper. Says any woman who kept me alive deserves her apple cake recipe. I kept you alive. You and that soup. He grinned, 19 years old and finally looking it instead of worn down to sinew and worry. Though Mr. Hollister paying my wages while I healed didn't hurt none. Through the trees, the sawmill's whistle announced lunch. Different sound. Now someone had fixed the valve, so it sang clear instead of shrieking. Men's voices carried from the yard, actual conversation instead of the old silence. Martha stood, basket heavy with vegetables. Her back protested 51 years of bending and lifting, making themselves known. Jimmy took the basket without asking, natural as breathing. They walked toward the cookhouse. Smoke rose from 3 chimneys now, the main kitchen, the new bread oven the men built in September, and the smallest from the coffee pot that never went cold. Wade stood at the wash station, scrubbing his hands beside the Tucker brothers. His bad arm worked the soap while his good one held the brush. No hiding it anymore, no shame in it either. "Martha," he called out, "that beef stew today, beef and barley." Thank the sweet Lord. He dried his hands on a clean towel, another change. Clean towels appeared every morning now, washed by whoever drew laundry duty. Sam's been talking about it all morning. Inside the cookhouse, 3 women worked beside Martha's stove. Mrs. Tucker came twice a week to help with bread. Wade's sister, who'd moved from Portland when she heard her brother had stopped drinking himself mean. And Sarah, Jimmy's sister. The girl had arrived 2 weeks ago. Coughed better, thanks to medicine Jimmy could finally afford. 17, sharp as her brother, hands that knew work. She stood at the cutting board, dicing onions with Martha's good knife, the one Hollister ordered from San Francisco. "Onions are ready," Sarah said. Her voice still carried the rasp of damaged lungs, but no wet rattle. "Potatoes, too." Martha checked the pot. Beef chunks browning proper, fat rendering clear. She added the onions, the sound of them hitting hot grease like applause. "Where's the time?" Sarah asked. "Window box." The girl fetched it, fingers sure on the stems. 2 weeks, and she already moved through the kitchen like she'd always been there. Yesterday, Martha caught her teaching the Tucker brothers' youngest son to fold dumplings, patient as paint drying. Men filed in for lunch. 53 now. Hollister had hired 3 more, all married men with families. They hung their hats on pegs installed last month, sat at tables covered with actual tablecloths. Mismatched, donated, patched, but clean. Old Sam took his usual spot, but not alone anymore. The burned cousin sat beside him. Then 2 of the new men. They dealt cards while waiting, not gambling. Just an old man teaching younger ones how to count cards proper. "Martha!" Hollister's voice from the doorway. He stood there in work clothes, not his office suit canvas pants and a wool shirt, sawdust in his hair. He'd been working the green chain, learning what men actually did all day. Letter came. He held up an envelope. His daughter's writing visible from across the room, but this one was opened. Red, worn, soft from handling. "She's coming. Christmas." The room didn't go quiet. Too much had changed for that kind of dramatic silence. "But people have heard." Sarah smiled. Sam nodded approval. Wade muttered something about needing to fix the guest cabin's roof. "That's good," Martha said, ladling stew. "Real good. She wants to meet—" He stopped, cleared his throat. "She wants to meet the woman who taught me to eat again. Her words." Martha handed him a bowl. Their fingers brushed his rough now from actual work. Hers permanent scarred from decades of burns. "Tell her I just cook. People decide for themselves whether to eat." He took his bowl to the table, sat between Jimmy and one of the new men, started at eating, but also talking something about adjusting the saw height, technical details that would have stayed locked in his office before. Martha watched them all, her kitchen full of people who'd learned to be hungry together and then learned to be fed together. Sunday would be more families. Children. 3 long tables set up under the oaks. She'd need help. They'd all help. Martha hit Sarah at her elbow. Voice urgent, but trying not to show it, out the window. A wagon pulled up, a woman climbing down, gray-haired, straight-backed despite her years. She had a covered basket in one hand, a traveling bag in the other. Jimmy saw her too. His spoon clattered against his bowl. "Ma," the woman. Mrs. Moore stood in the yard, looking at the cookhouse like she wasn't sure of her welcome. Her dress was mended careful, boots polished but worn through at the toes. She'd traveled 200 miles to see her son walk again. Jimmy stood so fast his chair tipped. He caught it, set it right, walked to his mother with only the slightest limp. She dropped her bags to catch him, her hands framing his face like she was memorizing the changes. "You look fed," she said, loud enough to carry. "You look whole." "I am, Ma." She looked past him to Martha in the doorway. 2 women separated by 50 feet of dirt and a lifetime of different choices. Mrs. Morse walked forward, stopped just out of reach. "You're Martha." "I am. Jimmy wrote. Said you saved him." "Jimmy saved himself. I just made soup." Mrs. Morse laughed short, surprised. "That's what he said you'd say." She lifted the basket. "Apple cake. The recipe's in my bag. But I thought practice first. Together." Martha stepped aside, making room. Kitchen's warm. The afternoon passed in flour clouds and cinnamon smell. Mrs. Morse's hands knew the work quick. Sure, no fuss. She talked while she baked, about Jimmy as a baby, about his father who came back from the war with lungs full of gas that killed him slow, about keeping children alive on nothing, then less than nothing. Sarah helped, learning by watching. The men ate cake warm from the oven, went back to work with sugar on their lips. Hollister took a piece to his office, came back for another. "Your boy," Mrs. Morse said quiet, when they were alone at the wash basin. "Jimmy told me 13 years ago." Martha's hands stayed steady in the soapy water. Long time passed. Time doesn't matter to grief. Mrs. Morse dried a plate, careful with the cracked edge. Just changes how you carry it. They worked in silence after that, but good silence, the kind that came from understanding. Evening brought everyone back. The Tucker brothers carried in planks, set up another table. Their wives arrived with corn from their gardens. The burned cousin brought his fiddle, tuned it careful in the corner. Martha stood at her stove, stirring tomorrow's beans. Through the window, she could see her cabin, smoke rising from her own chimney where Sarah was learning to bank a fire proper. Beyond that, the mountains going purple with sunset, the sawmill quiet for the night. Martha, Hollister again, but different. He held a ledger, not the mill's books. Something else. I've been writing it down. What we spend on food now versus before. Spending more, I'd guess. 3 times more. He set the ledger on the counter. But production's up 40%. Injuries down by half. Haven't lost a man to another mill since July. Math working out then. It's not about math. He watched the room his men playing cards, telling stories, the burned cousin starting a slow waltz on his fiddle. My daughter's letter, she said she was proud. First time since... His throat worked. First time in 5 years. Wade called out from across the room. Hollister Sam's cheating at cards again. I'm counting cards, Sam protested. That's skill, not cheating. Go, Martha said. Settle it. He went, sat down at the table, took the cards Wade offered, started dealing, his soft hands clumsy with the deck but learning. Martha returned to her beans. Tomorrow was Sunday the autumn feast. They were calling it. 3 months since she'd walked through that gate, dared them to taste her food. 3 months since she'd warned them not to eat if her size offended them. Nobody talked about her size anymore. They talked about whether she'd make biscuits or cornbread, whether the winter vegetables were ready, whether Jimmy's mother's apple cake was better warm or cold. She'd cooked for 8 boys once, lost them all to fever and war and accidents that happened too fast to prevent, spent 13 years cooking for strangers who paid but never tasted, never sat at her table, never said her name like it mattered. Now she cooked for 53 men who knew her coffee was best at 4 in the morning, who brought her wild herbs from the mountain, who built her a cabin with a window facing east so she could see the sunrise while she worked. Miss Martha, Sarah in the doorway, Mrs. Morse behind her. We're setting up for tomorrow. Where do you want the serving table? Martha looked at them. These women who'd appeared in her kitchen like seeds finding soil. Sarah, with her healing lungs and quick hands. Mrs. Morse with her apple cake and understood grief. Under the oak, Martha said, in the shade, close enough to the kitchen for refills, far enough for the children to run. They nodded, went to direct the men already hauling benches. Through the window, Martha saw Jimmy walking without his limp, carrying rope to mark the feast boundaries. Saw Hollister and Sam arguing about card rules while Wade laughed at both of them. Saw the burned cousin teaching his fiddle to one of the new men's sons. The beans bubbled on the stove. Tomorrow she'd add ham hocks someone donated, onions from her garden, molasses from the good stores. She'd cook for 100 people, workers and families, and whoever heard about free food and showed up hungry. She'd stand where she stood now, watching them eat, making sure everyone got enough, got seconds, got thirds if they wanted. Not because it was her job, Hollister paid her wages. But this went past wages. Because somewhere between that first pot of beans made from nothing and this kitchen full of plenty, she'd found her reason to cook again, not for the dead son who'd never taste her food again, not for the 8 boys who existed now only in burn scars and 4 a.m. habits, for these living people who needed fed, Who knew the difference between fuel and food? Who'd learned that eating together made them more than separate men do in time? The fiddle music drifted through the window. Someone had joined in with a harmonica. Boots stamped rhythm on the pine floor. Mrs. Morse's laugh rose above it all, bright as new pennies. Martha added salt to the beans, tasted, added pepper. Perfect. My grandfather worked that mill 43 years, told me this story when I was young, then again when he was dying. Said Martha Brennan saved more than Jimmy's knee that autumn. She saved them all from the slow starvation of forgetting they were human. The sawmill became known across Oregon as the place that fed its men proper. Other mills started hiring cooks who could do more than boil beans. Families settled nearby, knowing their men would come home whole. Martha cooked there till she died at 71, still standing at a stove. Hollister's daughter returned. Stayed, raised her children, calling Martha Grandma. The mill closed in 1921, but that garden she planted still grows wild carrots and sage. This is a work inspired by Western frontier stories, created solely for entertainment purposes. This story does not condone, encourage, or promote any form of violence or harmful behavior. All characters and events are products of the author's imagination, and any resemblance to real people or events is purely coincidental. The narrative explores themes of community, redemption, and human dignity through the lens of historical fiction. While set in the 1880s American West, the story intentionally avoids glorifying the harsh realities of that era, focusing instead on human connection and the transformative power of simple kindness through the act of sharing meals.